Our gospel reading this morning is from the book of Mark, chapter 7, verses 24 through 37. From there Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him. And she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Whenever I'm sitting in an airport, I sometimes wonder whether a famous person might walk by. Would I recognize a famous person if one just walked past me pulling a suitcase like everybody else? Could someone whose face is on every grocery store tabloid just walk through an airport and escape notice? Probably not. And I think that would be terrible. Imagine the crowds all wanting to take selfies with you. It would be exhausting. Was Jesus exhausted by his fame? That's the picture I get from today's text. 7 chapters into Mark, Jesus slips into an unidentified house in a non-Jewish region, and the text tells us he did not want anyone to know he was there. And how did that work out for him? About like you'd expect. According to the text, he could not escape notice. The presence of Jesus is obvious. Somebody finds him. Somebody who wants more than a selfie. This woman has something to say, and she is going to keep talking until Jesus hears her. What makes people stay in a conversation, especially an argument, when evidence suggests that it is going badly for them? A lot of times we don't stay. Instead of fighting for our point, we throw up our hands and say, "Fine," in the voice that means it is not fine at all, and we storm out of the room. And now our anger feels more important than our point. Now we'd rather be angry than be heard. But sometimes people really stick with it. They might be facing overwhelming odds. They might be rejected at every turn. They might even be insulted. But they will stay in the conversation until someone hears. They will keep on talking as long as they believe that somewhere, someday, someone will listen. And they will go from person to person to person, looking for that someone who will listen, until either the goal is achieved or hope runs out. And hope will not run out until the day they decide that no one else is ever going to hear them. For the woman in today's gospel story, hope had not run out. which may or may not be surprising depending on how long she had been seeking her daughter's healing. The daughter was very ill. The text says she had a demon. Maybe the illness had just descended the week before. Maybe it had been going on for years. We don't know. And we don't know how many people this woman had been to asking for help before she came to Jesus. But we do know there were people to go to. Like every culture in every time and place, first century Palestine had its theories of disease and how to overcome it. As you can imagine, there was very little science involved, but there was plenty of religion. In the non-Jewish region of Tyre, where this story takes place, the culture was probably saturated with pagan gods and goddesses and lesser divinities. The Syrophoenician woman in this story was not raised to believe in the God of the Jews, but as a product of her culture, she probably did assume the existence of divine power. She assumed that human beings were not without help. Now, of course, there were enterprising types who were ready to take advantage of that assumption. And we've seen these healers before in the story of the woman with the issue of blood, of whom Mark says she had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. Probably this desperate Gentile woman had also been to numerous healers. She would have told them her story, describing her daughter's illness and her hope for healing. She was probably disappointed time and again, but she just kept on looking. And then she heard about Jesus. That shows us just how famous Jesus was. He could not escape notice. By this time, everyone was talking about him, not just Jews. This woman was not a Jew. This region was not Jewish. Some commentators speculate that Jesus might even have been staying in a Gentile home. After all, he had just recently dismissed the dietary laws separating Gentiles from Jews. We heard that last week. Jesus declared all foods clean. The Jesus in last week's story certainly seemed intent on breaking down some barriers. So it's possible that he slipped into a Gentile's home. Maybe that's why the text says he didn't want anyone to know he was there. More likely it was a Jewish home, and in that case the homeowner was in the minority in the region. Maybe Jesus wanted to keep quiet so he wouldn't attract more Jews and cause trouble for his friend. Or how about this one? Jesus was afraid that if his presence became obvious, his friend's non-Jewish neighbors would come seeking healing. And Jesus wasn't there to heal non-Jewish people. After all, Jesus was a product of his culture too. You know that we get a different picture of Jesus in every gospel. A few weeks ago, we talked about how John's Jesus knew all people and knew what was in everyone. By contrast, Mark's Jesus still has something to learn, even about himself. In Mark, we see the picture of Jesus and even how he himself understood his ministry developing over time. John's Jesus frequently gives tests. Mark's Jesus frequently takes them, like the one he's about to take from the Syrophoenician woman. She approaches him so boldly. What gives her the courage? Love for her daughter, certainly. Desperation, unquestionably. And also her unconquered belief that someone someday will hear her. She is predisposed to believe in divine power. She believes there is someone who can connect her to it. Someone will help her someday, and maybe this is the day. So she starts the conversation. She tells Jesus about her daughter and begs him to cast out the demon. She starts a conversation. Jesus tries to stop it. Worse, he attempts to exit the space of conversation, not just by saying no, but by insulting the woman. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. There's no getting around this text. Don't think commentators haven't tried. Some have concentrated on the fact that Jesus uses in the Greek a diminutive form. He doesn't say dogs, he says puppies. Who doesn't love puppies? But there's no escaping the truth. Jesus has answered hope with insult. It is hard even to catch our breath. Now, each of the Gospels deals in some way with a very important question. How and when did Jesus' ministry extend beyond the Jews? When did it become apparent that the hope of salvation was extended to all? In Mark, that crucial revelation is about to occur right here in Jesus' encounter with the Syro-Phoenician woman. But for a terrible moment, it seems that the door to the kingdom of God is swinging shut, and that the one closing it is Jesus. But he can't get it closed because this woman has her foot in the door. She stays in the conversation, and she won't let him leave either. And that is astonishing, not only in its boldness, but in its hope. After an insult like that, she has no reason to believe he will listen. Or does she? If Jesus can't escape notice, it's because his reputation precedes him. She's heard the stories. Who hasn't? They're being told everywhere. She's heard that he has healed diseases and cast out demons. She's heard about the leper who said, "If you choose, you can make me clean." And she's heard that Jesus was moved to make that choice. She's heard about the man in the synagogue with the withered hand, and how Jesus was grieved because the Pharisees didn't want the man healed on the Sabbath. Surely she's heard about that other woman, bold as she is, who simply touched Jesus' cloak and was healed. So she's heard not only that Jesus heals, but that he can be moved, he can be grieved, he can be touched. She's heard that he fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. So she's heard that he offers radical abundance. And she might have heard, too, that he's questioning the laws of separation, declaring all foods clean. She's heard that he can break down boundaries. With these stories being told everywhere, how could Jesus escape her notice? She knows who he is. She recognizes him all right. He is her best hope. His presence itself is what gives her courage to use her voice and keep using it. So she stays in the conversation and she answers him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." By using his own metaphor, she insists that he stay with her in this conversation. And for that, Jesus rewards her. What does he say? "Your faith has made you well?" No. Jesus rewards her for what she says. Literally, in the Greek text, for the word. King James, "For this saying, go thy way." New International Version, "For such a reply, you may go." English Standard, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." He rewards her for staying in the conversation and for giving him the word that refreshes his own exhausted spirit, reopens his eyes to the possibilities of divine power, possibilities that he was at first too reluctant or too enculturated or just too tired to see. And after this encounter, everything changes, not just for the woman and her daughter, but for the whole world. Because while the woman goes home and finds her daughter healed, Jesus goes out and starts doing ministry among the Gentiles. He performs another healing, still in this non-Jewish region. He will go on to feed another 4,000 people, still in a non-Jewish region. And when the second feeding is over, Jesus will reprove his disciples for doubting ever that there could be enough bread. all because one determined woman stayed in the conversation, and Jesus stayed there too, until what could not escape notice was the radical abundance of God's grace. I wonder if that kind of conversation could happen today. There is certainly strong traffic in rejection and insult, but not so much in real discussion. It's not easy to stay in the conversation. Our desire to be angry overwhelms our desire to be heard. Or we think we can be heard more clearly somewhere else, like on the internet. People are much less likely to engage with one another when it's so easy to storm out of the room, fine, and go back to the computer. I shudder to think that today the Syrophoenician woman, instead of sticking with her point and moving Jesus' heart, might just go back to Facebook and tell everyone how angry she is. And everyone who agreed would give her a like, and everyone who disagreed would say something nasty, and no hearts would be changed, and neither would the world. But then today she might not come to Jesus in the first place. A person looking for hope today does not necessarily look to the church. This woman might point to the church's poor record on dealing with scandals like sexual abuse as evidence that the church cannot be trusted to hear her story. Or she might discount the church as a source of help because, as a product of her culture, she does not assume the existence of divine power. She may believe that humans are essentially without help. Or she might not even think about the church because it's just not relevant. The church escapes her notice. The presence of Jesus escapes her notice. If the presence of Jesus escapes notice in today's world, it's no one's fault but our own. It is our fault for not telling the stories that once made his reputation precede him. It is our fault for not living his example. It is our fault for not staying in the conversation when we are challenged by new ideas or difficult personalities. As long as there are people with stories to tell, and there will always be people with stories to tell, we, the church, must demonstrate our willingness to stay in the conversation, even to the point of letting it change us. We must make it obvious that we will hear. Because when people stop believing someone will hear them, they stop talking. And sometimes they start shooting. We must make the presence of Jesus obvious in the world, so obvious that he cannot escape notice. As long as the world can't help noticing that Jesus is here, the world will know there is hope. The world will know that someone hears. The presence of Christ gives people the courage to use their voices, to ask for what they need, even to refresh the perspective of the church and keep us all in the conversation. This is how people learn, and this is how hearts are changed. This is how God changes the world. Amen.